How you doing, everybody? Welcome back to Before I Forget. This is my video channel inspired by my Instagram channel, 1985 Road Dog. Today I'm going to talk about Paul Dianno and Iron Maiden. Paul Dianno, I'm sure a lot of you fans of the metal scene know that Paul Dianno was the original singer in Iron Maiden. He recently passed away. I had the opportunity to spend time with Paul Dianno in '81 on the Killers tour when they came to America and opened up for Judas Priest. I just want to speak a little bit about that. Paul Dianno, I was working at a record distributor that dealt with import music in the 79, 80, 81 in those years, and I had gotten the first Iron Maiden 7-inch single, an independent single called the Soundhouse Tapes. That was their first recorded material. And then I, of course, got their early singles, Running Free, and then their first album on EMI, and then, of course, the Killers album on EMI. That version of Iron Maiden, in the beginning of new wave of British heavy metal, 79, 80, Def Leppard came out of that scene, 79, they had that first 7-inch single. Iron Maiden, Angel Witch, Tigers of Pantang, so many bands, Raven, Fist. There was all these new wave of British heavy metal bands coming out of England in the late 70s, 79 into the early 80s. And it was a very raw scene. A lot of it was influenced by, hard rock, yes. But there was a big punk influence in a lot of that too. Punk by that point had kind of it wasn't punk anymore. You had the beginning of the oi scene and hardcore-ish, GBH and Discharge and the Cockney Rejects and all these harder edge punk bands. And a lot of the early new wave of British heavy metal was influenced by that too. Maiden, I thought, were like a punk metal band, always. Dianno's voice, I think Paul Dianno really loved the Cockney Rejects, if I remember him telling me that. But his voice was very raw and rough. They were like punk metal. The beginnings of that scene was very rough and raw. It wasn't, it hadn't gotten to the point where everybody sounded like Judas Priest with that high-pitched Rob Halford type vocal. There were all different vocal styles. A lot of it was like Dianno, rough and raw. Rob Halford had that operatic kind of voice. And it hadn't gotten to the point where all the metal bands sounded like Rob Halford, that kind of vocal. It hadn't gotten there yet. So that's what I really loved about Maiden with Paul Dianno, was it was like punk metal. I ended up putting together an in-store record appearance at Zigzag Records in Brooklyn when they first came over, and I hung with Paul a bunch, and we partied and, did all the bad stuff, and he was really, really cool and really, really nice to me. And I had at the time, my car was a 1969 GTO, fast car. And I'd pick Paul up at the hotel, and we'd go out to the in-store, or I'd drive him back to the city and to Manhattan. And we hung out a lot. He rode around in my car. We were listening to cassettes. We partied. It was the 80s. It was the beginning of the 80s, and Paul was into partying. He was really the only guy in Maiden that was into the cocaine. The other guys were, beer drinkers, I think, or, maybe some Jack Daniels. But Paul took it further, and it ended up where he got, let go from Iron Maiden because of his drug use or partying. And then they get Bruce Dickinson. Now, Bruce Dickinson was in a new wave of British heavy metal band called Samson. And I remember getting that record in the record distributor, and everyone just laughed at that record. They looked at the cover, which was like a guy in a black leather, S&M hood. And then the lyrics were a lot of the lyrics for a lot of the songs were very homosexual, and it was just like, no one knew what to make of this. It was like, it was heavy and metal, and Bruce Dickinson had that screamy Rob Halford type of operatic voice. And but I couldn't believe that that was the guy they chose to replace Paul Dianno, the guy that wrote these lyrics and sang in this band with this stupid album cover. It was just like, why'd they choose this guy? I mean, listen, they went on to be a big band, and they had big hit records and big touring concert attraction. Of course, Maiden would not have been able to continue without somebody like Bruce Dickinson. I just thought at the time, it was like, well, why'd they choose this guy? And then once they got Dickinson, it really became what I call the Dungeons and Dragons kind of lyrics, and you know, Flight of Icarus and all this stuff, and it became much more you know, fantasy kind of, and it just wasn't my thing. I was never into that kind of Dungeons and Dragons kind of lyrical content, you know, and I miss Paul Dianno. I mean, that guy, those first two Maiden albums, to me, those are the best Iron Maiden albums ever. You know, people argue with me and whatever. It's because I related to that version of the band before Bruce Dickinson. And I had known who Bruce Dickinson was from Samson, and I was like, this is awful. So it's just strange how when you're young, or you first are introduced to a band and then they switch a member, whether it's a guitarist or a singer or whatever, and Maiden had, you know, you kind of get used to that, and then when it changes, you don't like it, or it's not the same. I mean, Maiden changed members, you know, Clive Burr was the drummer, and then they got Nico, and in the beginning days of Maiden, they had Dennis Stratton, who then left, and he was replaced by Adrian Smith, and Dennis Stratton, I think, went and formed Tigers of Pantang, or he had come from Tigers of Pantang. I can't remember that full story, but they had different members. But the singer is very important to the sound of the band. Yes, a guitarist is a guitarist, but the vocal is so unique to that person. So when they switched and Dianno left and it was Bruce Dickinson, I was like, I lost interest in Iron Maiden, honestly. Plus, there were so many other bands out at the time. By that point, there were a lot of bands that from the new wave of British heavy metal scene, and then American bands, you know, 80, 81, 82, then you had the beginning of Motley Crue and all that stuff happening. But in 79, 80, and 81, all those cool metal records were coming out of England. Like I said, Def Leppard, you know, Raven, Tigers of Pantang, Angel Witch, you know, just there's so many. There's a lot more. Tank, Fist, lots of bands. And I was at this record distributor, and we were getting records every day. And every day you're listening to these new records as they come in. And it was like crazy. So I was so plugged in. I knew every record that came out from every label out of England. Every day we were getting boxes of records. So, you know, I related to that version of Maiden. And, you know, it's sad to see Paul gone. You know, I was aware of his career after Iron Maiden, Battle Zone and stuff like that. He was always really nice, a regular down-to-earth guy. He liked to party, and we did. And I write about this in my book. So if you want to delve further into the Maiden story with me in those years, just get my book and read the chapter that I talk about Iron Maiden and the in-store record appearance and all that stuff. But I just wanted to come on and just say, you know, rest in peace, Paul Dianno, great vocalist. Those two Maiden albums to me are Iron Maiden, period. Plus, when I worked for LA Guns later on, we opened up for Iron Maiden, and, you know, it was like Spinal Tap. Like Bruce Dickinson was just such an ass. He really was a pompous guy. And I never liked him. I just never gelled with him on that level. Some of the Maiden guys were cool on that. You know, LA Guns opened for Maiden, and Nico was cool. There's a couple guys that we interacted with, but you know, I think Phil Lewis one time, Phil Lewis, man, Lord Byron, I called him. Phil Lewis actually one time was chased down by Bruce Dickinson's wife. She wanted to sleep with Phil, and she got him. She ended up sleeping with Phil, but it was this whole thing of keeping it from Bruce, and there's so much craziness went on in those years. And I just remember that, actually. I completely forgot that Phil Lewis was being chased down by Bruce Dickinson's wife. Anyway, God bless Paul Dianno. Rest in peace. First 2 Maiden albums, to me, that's all that matters in the Iron Maiden camp. Thanks for tuning in. Again, my book is available on Amazon. Hardcover, softcover, Kindle. It's available globally. And my Instagram account, 1985 Road Dog. Thanks so much for tuning in and watching, and I'll speak to y'all soon. Ciao.